All right, so hi everyone, welcome to our workshop on literature review fundamentals. My name's Kerry and happy to have everyone along today. So we've got a lot to do as we usually do. So I am going to get started. And just to begin, QUT acknowledges the Turrbal and Yagara as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. We pay respect to their elders' laws, customs, and creation spirits. We recognise these lands have always been places of teaching, research, and learning, and QUT acknowledges the important role Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people play within the QUT community. Okay. So our goals for today are quite broad here. We're going to look at the key purposes and key components of your lit review. We're going to look at some strategies for you to plan and write your literature review. So broken into two parts today. We've got our peer discussion in between and a Q&A session at the end. So any questions that come up, maybe jot them down and we can talk about those questions at the end of the session. So today's resources will be up on Blackboard as they always are. Let me pop the link for you. You'll be able to have a look later. I'm just going to pop it into the chat, but I'll also send you an email with where you can find the links for today. I haven't put the slides up just yet, but I will. All right, so writing circles and workshops are the two main group events we have in the writing program. Workshops like this one provide an overview of the theory and principles of an area of writing practice, and then the writing circles, we have exemplars and practical activities where you check your own work. So today is a workshop. We do have a writing circle on this topic as well. So that's the 12th of April. So please come along to that, especially if you sort of leave today wanting to know more. We'll have exemplars. So today we set you all up and we go a bit deeper in and look at exemplars in the writing circle in a couple of weeks. All right, so I often just pop this slide up just so you guys know that there's so many resources on HiQ. Please use them. Your candidature is everything about your milestones and the administrative side of your candidature. Training and workshops, of course, is where you find all the training and workshops. Engage with industry is about internships, really good opportunities for internships. We have a lot all the time coming through. And of course, plan your career is about your career. So please go onto HiQ and have a look at those different sections. Research milestones, again, another thing I've learned that I get a lot of questions about milestones. So if you do have questions, all the information is on HiQ and Blackboard, or you can email the Graduate Research Centre if you have a specific question about your own candidature. There you can see HiQ, and you can also see Blackboard. So a lot of information there. Because everybody's different, everyone's coming from a different faculty and you're doing different degrees, it's hard for me to answer those milestone questions. So please have a look at all the resources that are there. All right, so just to get you thinking, a couple of questions to jot down and just be thinking about as we go through these beginning stages here. What are some challenges that you've faced so far while you're writing your literature review? If you can think of a couple, just jot them down because that's something you're going to talk about in your peer discussion. I've also got a question in there about thinking about the purposes of the lit review. We're actually going to go through that quite deeply today. So just think about what you think you need the reader to know from your lit review. And then as we go through, you'll be able to double check and make sure that you're on the right track. The other thing as well to think about as we go through is, as researchers, you'll be writing many different types of literature reviews. So have a think about where you're at in your candidature, proposal, confirmation, final thesis. So obviously the purposes will change slightly the further you get through your degree and your research. And also don't forget as well, you're all from different faculties, at different stages, of course, as well. So, you know, a lot of what I'll talk about are general strategies that are useful, and then you can apply them as suits your needs, of course. And if you're doing a thesis by publication, you'll still need to write a lit review. You'll still need to include some small literature reviews in the articles that you submit as well. So, of course, these literature review strategies will be appropriate for all those different types of needs. So, having a look here, one of the questions I said, what are the purposes of your lit review that you're writing now? So this is a list of most of the purposes of a lit review in general. So have a little look through and just jot down a couple that you can identify there as being definitely something that you need to have in your current lit review that you're writing. Thanks, Erica. She's popped into the chat. Main topics for the introduction of the lit review, a challenge. Yeah. So what to include in the lit review? Well, potentially all of these things that I've got here in this list. That book there, Feck and Swales, I've adapted this from. If you really want to look at a book about writing a lit review, it's excellent. And it's not big either. So yeah, it could be something you could find they should have it at the library. Sorry, I haven't double checked that. But they've got a really good book about writing lit reviews. All right, so we've got that up. Hopefully you've jotted down a few things that you think you might need for your current lit review. Let's keep moving. All right, so purposes and components. Oh, we've got a poll to start off. Is the literature review really that important? Let's see. Where are my polls? Okay, that's helpful. I cannot find. All right, so we're putting into the chat. Which one do we think? Is the literature review really that important? All right, we got a whole lot of C's, so that's good because that is the correct answer. I'm so sorry, I don't know why I can't find it. It's literally just disappeared off my console down here. Very annoying. All right. So everyone agrees it's C? Yes, of course. It is really that important. So there we go. Just going back to D. Is anyone wanting to put D potentially? Maybe the not sure bit, you know what it is, but it's not your favorite part of the research process. Fair enough. All right, so yes, it is really that important. If your literature review isn't strong enough, it will reflect negatively on the rest of your study. Okay, so we really need to have a good, strong literature review. It positions your research within a field of study, and you're contributing to that ongoing conversation in your field. So that's where your lit review comes in. It's got many, many purposes, of course, but one of the main things is to position your study within the field. So if we looked very, very broadly, it's essential. Okay, it provides a critical analysis of previous research findings, explains why your research problem is important and why your research is valuable, and how your findings are going to fit into that research literature within your field of study. All right, so it's not just a list of studies. You can't just say someone says something else, and someone says something else, and there's my lit review done. Okay, you're a researcher, you need to put your research within that field and demonstrate you're an expert in your field. and you're using the literature to base your arguments on. So, you know, it's more than just the previous studies. So have a think about what kind of literature you're potentially going to write. They're usually narratives or systematic. So sometimes supervisors ask HDRs to do a systematic lit review to begin with. They are very strict with a protocol that's put into place as to exactly what the keywords are going to be, how many papers you're going to pull out and review, and it's around a specific field of literature. Whereas a narrative, you're sort of looking widely and there's not as many restrictions as such. So your research proposals and your thesis is generally where we're doing the narratives. You might do a systematic and try to publish that. That would be a good way to get a publication, particularly if you're doing thesis by publication. Supervisors often recommend doing that. I'm not going to talk about systematic literature reviews really because the library and the OSC have really good resources on it. So go into the QT website and put in systematic reviews and quite a lot of information comes up. You can see there 7th of April, there's actually an OSC workshop. So if that's what you're doing, I really recommend you go to that. And you can just see the resources there in that image. There's some videos in there as well. I think I've got the link for you. Yes, I do. All right. Okay, so, but, you know, even if you're doing the systematic literature review, even though we're not going to talk about the exact protocols today, the strategies that we're talking about, you'll still be able to, of course, use in a systematic lit review. So really broad overview of the process. You would be very aware of this, so we're not spending too much time on that, that sort of finding the literature part of it, but obviously we initiate it during the proposal stage. That's where we're starting it, and it's a living document that we continually refine the whole way through. You know, even when you're out there collecting your data and analyzing your data, still keep an eye on you know, current papers that are being published in your field so that you can add them in as you go through. But basically, the lit review is necessary for your planning, of course, and your reading, thinking, writing drafts, and going through that whole process of seeking feedback. You'll notice in that broad overview there, I've got seeking feedback twice. That's not an error. We need to keep seeking feedback all the time to improve our documents. All right, so lit review, living document that is going to be continually update as you go through your candidature. So initially, the lit review is actually all about you and orientating yourself as to exactly what your focus will be, what the scope and direction of your study is going to be, and, you know, just finding out as much as you can about what we already know about this research topic that you're investigating and what we need to know. So a lot of it is, you know, clarifying your research problem and making sure that that you're very explicit and clear about what you're investigating and why. So the literature review is going to help you to place your research into that field of study that we already have. So just pop into the chat now if you can. What is your research problem that you're investigating at this stage that you know? Are you looking to contribute to solve a problem that we have in society or in industry somewhere? Are you doing experiments? Is it a theoretical research that you're doing? Are you expanding on policies or processes or improving best practice? Anyone want to pop in? Yep, we've got someone filling a theoretical gap. It could be something I haven't got listed there too, by the way. Improving best practice, excellent. Solving a problem. Yep, experiments. All right, excellent, thanks. So we've got a whole range, as we always do. Yep, evaluating current practice and improving. Good, excellent. All right, moving on. So as I said, initially it's about you, helping you shape your study. Where are you going? What do you need to do? Your lit review is where you formulate your aims, your research questions, your hypotheses, and you're setting up all your arguments and looking at the background as well. All right, but the ultimate purpose, as always, with all of your documents is about the reader. All right, you've got to inform and persuade that you're going to make that original contribution, that your research is worthwhile. You need to inform and persuade regarding the theory or conceptual framework that you're using and your research questions. You're using the literature to justify all of these things. And of course, the gap in current knowledge, which again is explaining your the value of your study. So this idea of informing and persuading, I talk about a lot. The informing is describing and explaining where we're at and what we know. The persuading is where your critical voice comes in, because remember, whether you're at the proposal stage or final thesis, you must persuade the reader that this is worthwhile research and that your investigation is needed. So what does the reader exactly need from you? As we just said, describing and critical analysis. We need both to clearly explain the background and context of the study, that the research is needed, and exactly what knowledge is limited. What is it that your study is going to bring to this field of study that we don't already have? What is your contribution? So what are you demonstrating in the lit review? So as well as the purposes, I always want you to think about in your documents, no matter which section or which chapter or whatever the type of document you're writing, yes, you've got a purpose for the audience, and you're demonstrating something to the audience as well. So in a lit review, you're showing your depth of knowledge of the field. Okay, you must do that. You can't assume that the reader knows that you know, and you can't assume that the reader knows anything as well. In this type of writing of a thesis, it's all laid out. So you're showing your depth of knowledge, you're showing the evidence of the problem, you're showing that you know how to do a robust research design by justifying that you know what everyone else in your field has been doing. And by writing a strong lit review, you're also showing ultimately the examiner that you know how to analyze your own data as well. So you're demonstrating that ability to critically analyze. So each part of the research process really comes to light in the literature review by showing and justifying what other researchers have done in the field and using that as evidence. So within the thesis as well, remember that all your chapters and sections must connect in some way. So as we said, you've got a living document of the lit review. It does need to be updated as you go through. It puts your story within the field of study. You're starting to plant those seeds as to what sort of conclusions you're ultimately going to come up with. And you're adding those new publications right up until submission. So it's a really important part of your thesis, as we said, living document that continually needs to be updated. And we've got another poll, and I still can't find the poll button. So can you pop into the chat? Within the final thesis, which chapter do you think the lit review connects to the most? A, B, or C? Just pop it in the chat because I can't get the polls. Okay, we've got a lot of A's. We got some C's. Yeah. A couple of D's. A and C. That wasn't an option. Adriana says maybe all. Yep. Yeah, you want to have an all of the above. Okay. Kind of, yeah, I would say definitely, really, it would connect in some ways to all of the chapters. but essentially the main one would be the discussion chapter. So why would that be? Why do you think it's the discussion chapter that is the main one that your lit review is connecting? Any idea? So if you said A, B, or D, you're not wrong, but I suppose the most correct is discussion. We could have a, argument about whether it is or not. Yeah, your results are in the lit. Yeah, you tie your results into the lit review, working and improving, discussing evidence to support your work, linking results. Yep, perfect. So in the lit review, it's all about the previous studies, isn't it? And the literature itself. And then in the discussion, we have this beautiful added benefit of your results in there as well. And then you again using the literature as evidence to support your results and where your results fit. So lit review and discussion, look at them as mirrors. I wouldn't want you to have informational studies or literature from in the discussion that you haven't mentioned in the lit review. That's what I mean about it being a living document. If you have some findings that you weren't expecting and it was something that you didn't mention in the lit review, I would encourage you to add that into your lit review after the fact of having done the studies and the study and the analysis. It doesn't have to be a huge section, but just mention it. I just think it gives us the full link then. I wouldn't want you to have something new in the discussion if you can help it, or the conclusion either. So let's have a closer look at these purposes. So the ones that I've highlighted here are the ones we're going to look at now. Okay. So let's have a closer look. We're going to come back to this table a little bit later as well, but I just want to pull these ones apart because they're certainly the ones that you really do need to have in your lit review. So first of all, about the research problem. So we've got to be very clear and explicit from the very start. So you would introduce it in the introduction, definitely, and then expand and give more evidence and details in your lit review. So sorry, Erica has asked, about not having new literature in the discussion. So if you have unexpected findings from your data analysis that you hadn't mentioned in the lit review, and you want to obviously talk about it in the discussion, I would encourage you to go back to your lit review and add some information and previous studies around that point, so that there's not something unexpected in the discussion that the reader you haven't told the reader about already, or at least given them a little bit of information. I just think it's going to help you with your linking and leading the reader through. It was unexpected findings potentially for you, and you can still say it was unexpected, but I would like to see in the lit review any topics that you're intending on writing about in the discussion. Okay, cool. All right, so the problem. Right, we're informing and persuading, remember? We want to persuade the reader that this problem that you're investigating is urgent, it's challenging, there's negative impacts on whoever your stakeholders might be. But luckily, we've got your research coming up to help resolve the problem. So the literature as evidence to say, yes, this problem exists, okay? The research gap, of course, is very important. Is it the most important part of the lit review? Arguably, because of the fact that this is what we already know, this is what we don't know. We need to be explicit and clear about why this gap is important to be filled. So say the why do we care, and who. All right. Again, if you're writing your research proposal or even your confirmation, you're quite condensed in how many words you have, but these things are still really important to discuss and tell the reader about. Introduce these things in your introduction and then give more details in the lit review. We need to persuade the reader that there is this research gap and it needs to be filled for these specific reasons. I've just put down the bottom, don't promise too much. you're one person. Sometimes we start our research projects thinking, oh my gosh, I need to do 100 things, or maybe I won't find something. You will find something. Try to keep it contained because you're one person, all right? There's only so much that you can do, and you will find something. Previous studies, all right, so what about them? We need you to demonstrate the big picture and show that you understand your field of study, all right? So you're analysing the relationships, the patterns. What are the strengths of previous studies? What are the weaknesses? Are there researchers who have conflicting points about what you're investigating? Are there controversies? What do we know? And more importantly, what don't we know? So you're setting that whole scene. And so talking about the research field as a whole, firstly, would usually be what you would do. And then you'll narrow down to the important specific studies that you really want to give more details on, and that are the most relevant to your exact study as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. All right, the scope of your research, super important as well. We need to tell the reader in the introduction very briefly, then you're going to extend in the lit review. What are the limits of your area of inquiry? You're showing that this is an achievable study as well. Be very clear about the research fields that you're examining. Maybe you're crossing between more than one field of study, which is perfectly fine. People do that all the time. You need to justify why, though, and you need to explain how they intersect. So the other thing with your scope as well, when you're setting that scope and talking about what you're going to research and what you're not, be very careful about talking a lot about concepts that you're actually not investigating at all right? If you need to mention some concepts to set the reader up and to give the background, that's okay, but tell them this is part of the background. However, this study is not investigating these specific concepts because of these reasons. You need to tell them. If you're mentioning concepts in your lit review that you don't investigate later on, we'll be confused and we'll be like, well, why did you mention A, B, and C, but you're only talking about B and C? So if you're going to mention something because you think the reader needs to understand it for the background, that's perfectly fine. But make sure you keep the reader in the loop and tell them, oh, actually, this is important to know, but I'm not putting that in my study. And it could be as simple as saying, because you can't research every single variable. All right, you can definitely. And these are the important ones that I will investigate and justify why. I hope that makes sense. So you can see there, the image is a picture, a map of the world. You cannot have your scope be the whole world, right? You will have to narrow down. Now, it doesn't mean you can't talk about the whole world initially to say this is a worldwide problem potentially, but then narrow down to exactly your research setting. Key concepts and theories, you're going to mention those in the introduction, all of those important concepts and potentially your theoretical framework or conceptual framework. You set it up in the introduction, then all the details come in the lit review. You must define everything very clearly. Remember, you're demonstrating your knowledge, okay? And we can't assume the reader knows about all these concepts. We must define them clearly. Use the literature to define and justify any theories that you're using. And of course, your research design and methods. Don't forget about the research design and methods in your lit review. Talk about what other researchers use. Maybe you're doing similar, have a similar research design. Maybe you're deviating for a really good reason. You need to have that literature review, that information in the lit review to support your decisions. So looking at the methodological approaches in your field. This is something that is often missing in the lit reviews that I read. There's a lot of nice details about what previous studies have found, maybe their aims, maybe their conclusions, but skipping how they did the study. We need to know that. It could just be a couple of words, just say they interviewed participants or whatever it might be, or undertook a survey, whatever it might be, even just a few words to let us know how those studies that you're giving the details of, how did they investigate the research issues? And then that helps you to justify your research design as well. Potentially the methodology is part of the research gap. It should not be the only research gap, but it could potentially be one of the ones. So for example, in my field, it's usually interviews. So this is talking about students and writing and academic literacy. Usually it's qualitative research. I also did a survey just to be able to get a broader view and to pull in a different research method that's not usually used in the field. So you might be doing something like that. So fulfilling all these purposes demonstrates your critical thinking. When you understand the purpose of your document and you write a document that fulfills those purposes, this is thinking and writing critically, which is exactly what you want. Ooh, someone's asked me in the chat, not in the methodology. Yes, both methodology and in the lit review, you want to talk about the methods. In the lit review, you're not focusing purely on the methods, but if you're telling the reader about, remember what you're going to do is you're going to give a broad understanding of the field in general. Then you're going to narrow down to some specific studies that are important for your investigation, for us to have an understanding. So those specific studies that you pull out, don't just tell us their findings. Tell us very briefly their methods and how they investigated their issues. Like I said, it could be just a few words. Jones implemented a survey to investigate blah, blah, blah. Then we know as the reader, oh, it was a survey. Oh yeah, this research is doing a survey too. Okay, good, got it, right? You don't have to do a massive deep dive into their methods unless it seems like a good idea and something to help your justification. You're right, the methods chapter will be where you expand on that, but it leaves us hanging. If you tell us about a whole lot of previous studies, but never mention their methodology, while we're reading the lit review, we're not getting enough information basically to help us to understand where you're heading. Hope that makes sense. All right, so yes, we want to think and write critically. So fulfilling these purposes is a good thing. Okay, so enough of me talking for a minute. I'm going to pop you guys into your breakout rooms. Let's have a little look. Why do I make you do these peer discussions? Well, I don't make you. I invite you and I encourage you. And that is because this is how you learn more. It helps you with your presenting, your collaborating, and we don't learn new knowledge by being passive. We learn new knowledge by reading, of course, and through interactions and dialogue with others. So new ideas, new perspectives. When you're going into these peer discussions, if you're someone who's shy, that's okay. You can contribute one or two things, but listening is really going to help you. And it'll also make you see that everyone doesn't know everything. Okay, we're all learning, we're all on this journey, and you can really help each other. So I really encourage you to accept the pop-up and go ahead into the breakout rooms. I haven't quite set them up. I will in a minute. This is what you're doing. I'd like you to go in. We're going to be about 15 minutes. We're doing good with time. All right. So I hope you had a good discussion and that was enough time. It's always, you know, you'd be surprised the feedback I get. 10 minutes was too much. 15 minutes wasn't enough. So it's an each way bet for me. All right, so now that you're back and you've talked about some challenges and how you've addressed them, let's come back to these purposes. I know I go on and on about it, but if we fulfill all these purposes, you'll get a good lit review, which is what we want, isn't it? All right, so what do you think? Who's up to the research proposal stage? The writing circle we had the other day on introductions, nearly everybody was at the proposal stage. Confirmation, stage 2, MPhil proposal. Is that what we've got today, or have we got some people up to final thesis? You can pop it in the chat or not. Proposal, confirmation, stage 2. All right, great. Yeah. Okay, so I've highlighted the things that I think should be in your research proposal. Alrighty. Now, as we said, particularly if you're up to stage 2 or it's your MPhil proposal, you don't have a lot of room, do you? But you can still do all of these things in a concise way. So potentially some of these things, your key concepts maybe, is just a couple of sentences. All right, we're setting the reader up. But then there'll be other parts that are more important in the lit review that you'll need more than a couple of sentences. Okay, so yeah, we've got most of you have saying proposal or confirmation. Time frame down there, you notice that's something to think about. You might keep changing your mind. It really depends on your research field. Some people will need to go back 30, 40 years. Some people, that would be ridiculous, and they might only need to go back 5 or so years. So something to think about, but obviously at the proposal or confirmation stage where you're limited, you might want to focus on the most, the shorter time frame, sort of the last 5 years, or you might need to go back further, or part of your decision making and your critical thinking. So what if you're up to your final thesis? I'm not sure, maybe there are some of you. I would say all of this, okay? You're going to need it all in there. Okay, seminal papers and authors. I also had that for your research proposal. Don't miss important people out. If you're not sure, if you've got too many important people, potentially you could acknowledge them, but say, you know, the one that you're focusing on for whatever reason is Jones or whoever it is. But that's something that examiners will take very seriously, is the seminal authors of the field, making sure you have them in. All right, so final thesis, you've got all of these purposes going on. Okay, so we're pretty clear on what we need to put in this lit review. How are we going to go about that? Let's have a look. So where to start? Of course, by reading. Read, and read some more, but write as you read. Write as you read. Keep the big picture in mind. Be clear about what you need to demonstrate to the reader and your purposes as well. Write a whole lot of dot points for yourselves to make sure you remember everything. What are you going to include? What aren't you going to include? You need to be judicious in those proposal stages because you don't have much room. Maybe you can include more and expand for confirmation or your final thesis. Sometimes you're not quite sure yet. Okay, that's all right. You might have to take some bits out or put them back in again, whatever it might be. That's why we seek feedback, isn't it? Particularly from your supervisors as well. It's going to take time, as we sort of flagged a bit earlier. Potentially this isn't your favorite part of the research process, but it's an essential part. I'm sorry about that. So lots of reading, lots of thinking, lots of drafts to become clear about your scope and exactly what needs to be included. So be flexible. If you're not sure, write a few sentences, flag it for your future self to say, hey, I've put this here. I'm not sure if I need it or not quite yet. Make the decision later. So these are the strategies we're going to look at. What have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so let's go. So be smart when you're searching the literature. You know, you should know how to do these sorts of things. As I said before, not going to talk too much about this. The library has a lot of awesome information to help you with your searching. As I said, be smart. That means do it as quickly and as effectively as you can. Every faculty has a librarian attached. So find your faculty librarian and make friends with them would be a big tip. Don't just look at research articles. Books are good too. I know that books are sometimes a little bit older, a bit behind, but certainly they can still be useful. All right. Make sure you read widely. And if you find a source, maybe you're using Google Scholar or somehow you come across something, but the library doesn't have it, just contact them and see if they're able to get it for you. You never know, they might be able to, and they're quite happy to help HDRs accessing when they can. That last point, setting boundaries, is a good one. And, you know, I don't want you to have this idea that I don't know enough, I need to read more before I start writing. They need to go together, the reading and the writing. Okay, they're completely linked, reading and writing. And by writing while you read, it's going to help your understanding as well. All right, e-prints. I talk about this most of the time in all of our classes because I want you to go into e-prints and find some examples. Okay, you can see I've circled thesis format. If you're doing monograph, tick monograph. If you're doing publication, tick that. Creative works, tick that box. So you narrow down the search and you can find some examples that potentially are what yours could look like. Really important strategy. Go and look at their literature reviews and see what you think. And also, as I said, come to the writing circle because we'll look at exemplars. All right, again, be smart managing the literature. There's a lot happening, isn't there? You can pop in the chat any tips you have around this sort of thing. What referencing software are you using? How are you storing everything? Note taking, annotating. So by annotating, I mean making notes as you read. I used my iPad. I had an app called iAnnotate. I assume it still exists. It was really good. I was able to store and make notes on the side. You can do that in your software for referencing as well. EndNote, but I download all the papers and store them. So if I need to go back, yes, that's exactly right. Good, good. So having those systems and keeping track of your thoughts is really important too. You will forget why you decided not to include a study or why you did include it. So leave yourself notes. Yep, good reader. Yep, so a few good ideas in there. Excellent, thanks guys. Now, because there's so much literature out there, potentially for most of our topics, there's some research topics that there's not much literature available, so lucky you. But if you've got a topic that there is a lot of research out there, try to restrict your time frame if you can. Try to narrow down by methodology or the types of participants or whatever it is that you can to try to limit the amount of reading you need to do. But at the same time, read as much as you can to be aware as you can of all the different ins and outs of the literature in your field. So question in the chat, how do we know what to include and what to leave out? You've got to try to decide, work it out, figure out how long your lit review is needing to be, how much room you have, ask your supervisors their advice, but really it's your critical thinking. What's the literature that's going to best support your aims and your purposes? So it's a bit of a question of using your critical thinking, and it will take time, you know, and that's okay. Think about it. You know, put a note to yourself saying, I don't know whether to include this one, I'll decide later. Here's a really good tool that you might find useful. I've just got the link for you. So basically, it's a visual graph, as you can see. The dots are called sort of nodes. So the papers are arranged according to similarity. The color is the publishing year. So you can see that Carter 2020 is a darker color. And then you can see the lighter color, the earlier publications. The size of the node says how many, is indicative of how many citations the publication has had. So it'll give you a bit of an idea. So that one was writing a thesis I put in, and that's sort of what came up. So you can see, you know, I'd need to go in and at least have a little browse through quite a few of those, but then some of the older ones, maybe not, if it was the way, if it was the way I wanted to reduce how much. Yep, it connects all the papers. All right, and here's another one that might help you as well. Just going to pop that into the chat. All right, so another visual mapping tool, a little bit similar. You can see in there what I wrote into the search was graduate research writing, and you can see how it came up. So each circle is articles related to the topic. So the bigger the circle, the more papers there are. So as part of your strategy for writing a lit review, we need to do our planning. Like everything, try to schedule time for that planning, that big picture thinking as to, you know, you don't need to have hours on it, but just spending half an hour or an hour every sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks to see where you're at is a good strategy. So with your lit review, how long does it need to be? That's really something to work out. Is it 1,000 words? Is it 3,000? Is it 10,000? You know, obviously that's going to make a really big difference to what exactly you can include. Now, if you've got a proposal that you can only have 1,000 words potentially for your lit review, and I've given you all of those purposes that you need to fulfill, as I said, they're very condensed. You can still fulfill them all, but just in a couple of sentences, if that's the limit that you have on your number of words. With your planning as well, try to set up some draft subheadings. We're going to have a look at that in a second. And how are you going to structure it? Now, this is with your planning, you need to be flexible as always. Are you going to go chronologically when you talk about previous studies? Are you going to go thematically? Are you going to go via the methods they've implemented, via the concepts that you're investigating, streams of literature? So there's all different options. There's no right or wrong. Your lit review is probably one of the key sections or chapters that will change quite a lot as you progress through and get more and more feedback. So someone's put in the chat, how many references do we need to review when our word limit is only 2,000? It is hard to cut everything down. It's very hard for me to say how many you need. You know, I don't know, a dozen more. It just depends on your field of study. Just write. Don't sort of worry about how many. Just see how many you need to justify what you need to justify. Yeah, don't. So that, do we have to go super simple? This author studied this and found this and then repeat? No, absolutely not. Show your critical analysis. 40, maybe less. Do we read the abstract intro? Don't need to read the whole journal. I feel the need to read the whole journal. That's a really good question, Michael. We're going to talk about critical reading in a second. My advice is read the abstract or the intro initially and flag very quickly, is this something I should be reading now? Is this looking like it's something very important for my lit review? If you're thinking maybe put it to the side for now. And you know, so everyone will approach this a little bit differently. I love the search. I'll search, I'll find 20, 30 articles and I'll be like, oh, and then I can't wait to read them. And then I don't get around to reading them as quickly as I should. So just try to flag them according to priority for your reading. The other thing Michael said in the chat is, I feel the need to read the whole article, potentially, especially if it's a good one and you really want to use it quite a bit, then yes, read it all. But initially just skim would be to figure out, do you need it or not? Yeah, finding so many. And it's so exciting when you find the articles, especially when they're recent. And then, yep, just goes in my list of to be done at some point. But yes, just getting back to the structure, so many different ways to structure, figure out what you think, get some feedback. Maybe you'll need to restructure. Maybe you'll do a combination of these, you know, maybe you're doing chronological and thematic, depending on the themes. So the how to structure is going to be a work in progress. All right, so subheadings, really important part of your planning. Draft as many as you can, maybe around those purposes that we've been looking at, potentially. That could be a start. However, every lit review will have unique subheadings. So remember at the beginning, and I said how I always get asked questions about milestones. I also always get asked questions about subheadings. Is there a template of subheadings that you can give me for my lit review? No, because every lit review is different. All right, so even if you're studying a similar topic as somebody, you'll still have a different lit review than what they will have in terms of your headings. So the table of contents, always think about this, whether it's for a chapter or when you're looking at your whole thesis or your whole document. The table of contents should shed light on the study. As the reader, I should be able to look at your table of contents for a chapter or your whole document and be like, okay, I can see where this is going, and now I'm looking forward to getting in and reading all the content. So you want clear subheadings, not vague ones. So we're going to look at some examples. Now, these are examples of a final thesis. As we've said, you know, I never know when you're coming, whether you're going to be at the proposal stage or the final thesis. So I try to do a range of examples. And for this one, it just happens that they're for a final thesis. So have a look at the heading here. Resilience of water supply systems in meeting the challenges posed by climate change and population growth. Okay. Now I want you to have a look at those subheadings. And what do you notice? All right, we'll come back. I'm going to show you another one. Hydrosedimentological modeling of a small train tidal inlet system. This is one I use for my exemplars quite a lot. Saeed is my friend and allows me to adjust his thesis for these classes. Yes, Lindsay in the chat, you get a prize. If I had a prize, you would get the prize. All the subheadings refer to the title. Yes, they do. And the key concepts. What about this one? Investigating first-year undergraduate students' academic literacy experiences. Nature of academic literacy. Reading. Blah, blah, blah. All right, I'm going to go back. Let's have another look at this one. So exactly as Lindsay said, climate change, water cycles, climate change impacts. The only thing I would say about this one, conclusions. I would try, if you can, don't have a subheading that says conclusion until you get to your conclusion, okay? You could use summary if you want. You know, it's not the end of the world, but I would prefer not to use that conclusion subheading until you get to your conclusion. So, yep, this one, physical elements of a tidal inlet, environmental characteristics. That's an interesting one. So Saeed's put chapter closure. instead of saying conclusion. What do you think about that? And then this one, summary. But I want these subheadings that you've got to be clear, all right? Yeah. That 2.1 there, background. Background to what? We can assume background to the study, but is it background to the problem? So yes, Erica, you get a prize too. There is no conclusion to the lit review. It goes on forever. That's good. All right. So what do you notice? Write your thoughts in the chat. We've already done that. Nice. Right. They're unique to a special study. So don't come to the Q&A in a few minutes and tell me I want a template of my subheadings, because I can't give you that. So usually that's around those key concepts and variables and explicitly linked to the research topic. We just saw that. So you would have in your, so for your notes now, just write some of those key research concepts that you think that you would have to be defining and explaining in your lit review. So write a few draft subheadings in your notes right now based on what we just saw in those examples. Yeah, no two look the same exactly. See, there's someone, Moin has said in the chat something great that's a bugbear of mine, is connection between parts of the subheading is important. Yes, and we want to scaffold the reader through, don't we? So that's another thing that can be difficult about the lit review, is where do we start? What comes first, the chicken or the egg? You know, you've got complex research topics with a lot of concepts that overlap. So which one do you tell the reader about first? Make a decision, get someone to give you some feedback about the readability of it, and then go from there. My best advice is start broad and go narrow. So remember, we were talking about scope. So for example, if you're talking about say some kind of best practice for a health topic. So I don't know, let's talk about after operations. I don't know, how to make, to stop clotting. I don't know, whatever. You might give some stats about the world and how that this particular health issue is something that's worldwide, and there's so many people, you know, that have these problems, and, you know, because you're justifying your topic. So that would be an example of starting broad, starting with the world, and then narrow down to your research setting, whether it's Australia or Queensland or Brisbane or whatever it might be. It would make no sense to start at the small and go to the broad afterwards. So think about those things. Think about going broad to narrow. Now, if you have concepts in your study that are overlapping, tell the reader that and say, hey, I'm going to talk to you about all these important variables for my research topic. They all overlap. None of them are more important than the others, but I need to talk about them one at a time. Therefore, I'm going to start with this one and I'm going to go on. But keep in mind, they are all overlapping. You might even want to show a figure to show the fact that they all overlap. But just keep the reader in the loop and say to them, you know, you're very aware that these all work together, these concepts, but you need to talk about them initially separately, and then you'll bring it together to show how they overlap. So just keep the reader up to date. All right, reading critically. So that's reading with an open mind. So we were just talking about the fact that we need to skim. We're going to look at the abstract and maybe the introduction to figure out, is this something we need to read? Do we even need to include it in our lit review? So always consider when you open up that journal article and you're about to read it, well, why? Why am I reading this? What's my purpose? Is it just to get some general knowledge for myself? Is it because I think I need to use this as a previous study and really analyze it? Is it for a definition that I need to give? What's your purpose for reading? That will help. What is the writer's purpose? What are they trying to persuade you of? And you're going to evaluate that the author's ideas and assumptions. So try to make some notes try to ask questions as you're reading, and that will help clarify your thinking. And something you can do is write an annotated bibliography. Now, we're going to have a bit of a look at what an annotated bibliography might look at like in a minute, but we're going to do a poll. And guess what? I found my poll button. Well, one of my colleagues did while you were in the breakout. All right, let's go. What's an annotated bibliography? So anonymous, your answers. No one can see who says what.
I can't see the poll there, Kerry. Is it there?
All right. Let's have a look. Most of you have participated in the poll. Let's have a look. Can you see the results there? So we've got same as a reference list, a couple of people. Most people got C, which is the right answer. All right, good job. So this is an example, okay? I've pulled this from Google. There's my citation down the bottom. Now, this is an example of an annotated bibliography that's sort of an official one that you might be sending to your supervisor or that you need for a paper or something like that. Now, you could use the annotated bibliography as a strategy where you just write some dot points. But the key thing here is that the idea of this is to really analyze and pull apart an article or a source and say, okay, who is this author? How are they qualified? Are they qualified to be talking about these things? Making some objective comments about what they're saying, talking about any limitations, how they've contributed to the field, what's their method. Now notice there, they've just said questionnaire and a few things about the survey. The really key thing and the reason why I suggest you do this kind of thing, whether it's just for you and it's a bit messy with dot points or whether it's official and it's nicely set out, that the key here is the usefulness to your research. Okay, and what did you learn from reading this? And if you didn't really learn much, it still might be useful for your previous studies. But this usefulness to my research is a really key thing. And it's what I mean when I'm saying ask questions while you're reading and check yourself and think, oh, okay, that was something I didn't know, or that was something I did know. And now this really underlines how important it is. So, you know, you could be doing that just by annotating on the PDF or however it is that you take your notes. But sometimes having, you know, a document where you've got everything in one place, so you'll always know where to find. There's nothing worse than finding a really good source and then not being able to find it again. So that's why I talked about before, have a really good system. But, you know, you can just summarize your sources quite quickly in some dot points and pull out the really important parts that potentially you're wanting to use in your lit review. So the PowerPoint and the recording will be up on Blackboard a little bit later. I'll send everyone an email. Okay, so don't worry. So why would we do that? Helps to track your sources. You get some nice summaries that you might be able to utilize to get your thinking straight about what to put in, what not to put in. Evaluating the relevance, because remember we said you're not always going to have room to talk about every study initially in your proposal, but confirmation or final thesis you may have. So you can leave yourself notes to say, hey, I don't want to put this in my confirmation or proposal, but I will put it in my final thesis when I have more room. And the key part, the whole point of this, as I said, is was this source useful and how, in what way? All right. The image that I showed you was for sort of like one if you were writing, often if you do RA work, research assistant work for an academic, that's something they might ask you to do is an annotated bibliography. And then it would look quite official like this. If you're just writing it for yourself, you might just have dot points and that's okay. So big picture thinking, we get a little bit confined, and we're looking at every paragraph, and we're really focusing in on a section. I want you to also step back and look at the big picture. Remember what's the purposes of your lit review. Remember, you're engaging your reader and persuading your reader. So have you done that in all of your sections of your lit review? So again, you know, it's mind maps, diagrams, tables can help. You could make your annotated bibliography like a table. You know, that could be helpful, especially if you've got different fields of study that you're wanting to bring together. Big picture thinking, really important. Print out your table of contents, check that flow, like the examples that we looked at. That can be a good strategy. Diagrams are good. Now, they could be for you. They could be to show your supervisor so they can see what you're thinking. You may decide to put some kind of diagram or figure into your paper. This is just some examples. You might have a much better way of doing something like this. But basically, you know, you've got zooming in, so narrowing down, you've got puzzle pieces being fit together. Maybe you've got an intersection between 3 fields of study potentially. So a couple of reasons to do this, as I said, for yourself, for your supervisor. Yep, everyone will have access to the slides. All right. I didn't have a chance to put them on Blackboard before we went into the session. I'll pop them up as soon as we're done. I promise. Here, I'll even give you the link again. Hang on. But just give me time to breathe after the session, and I'll pop the slides up, but I'll also send you an email, all right, with everything, and the recording will be up on Blackboard too. All right, so keep the reader in the loop. You have to do this in every section, every document, and every chapter. Okay, so your lit review, you need an introductory paragraph or some sentences to set up the research problem and aim. Why do we need your research? Tell us that right from the beginning. Outline the structure. This lit review will discuss blah, 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 blah. All right, then you need that summary. We saw that in those table of contents. Summarize those gaps, summarize what your value is that you're bringing and how your study is going to help us to fill those gaps. Someone in the chat has said, would you advise to create our own figures or use figures from previous literature and reference them? Either or. Remember, in your MPhil proposal, you don't have much room. So you may not have room, but it might be a good way to show the reader quite quickly what you're doing. You decide. I don't know. Obviously, if you use something from previous literature and reference it, that's fine. See what your supervisors think. You know, you could give them a choice. Hey, there's this one or there's this one. What do they think? All right. Repetition. So I've just said here, keep the reader in the loop. Tell them what's happening in the introductory paragraph. Tell them what happened in the summary. So are we going to have too much repetition? That's what people sometimes have asked me. And the answer is no. Repetition is good. You have a big document, even your proposal, you know, it's not a short document, is it really? But we need the balance, don't we? And that's all part of seeking feedback. You know, ask the reader who you've sought feedback from, do you think there's enough repetition or is there too much repetition? You need to find that balance. Yes, there'll be repetition between chapter 1 and the lit review because chapter 1, you're introducing everything. That's normal and should happen. Yeah, you're just introducing in the introduction, funny that. And then you're expanding in the lit review and giving more evidence and more justification. So effective writers continually remind the reader, excuse me, remind the reader about the research problem, why it's important, what the gap is in our understanding, and about the previous knowledge and how you're adding, right? These are the key concepts and the key parts of your study. You need to keep reminding the reader of that regularly. So we'll look at this kind of thing in the writing circle in a couple of weeks. We don't have room for too many examples today, but we'll definitely be looking at that in the writing circle. All right, using your critical voice. This is another strategy for your lit review and indeed your entire thesis and whatever document you're writing. This is your research. You're allowed to have knowledge. Yes, you have to back it up with evidence from the literature, but you're allowed to know things and you're going to demonstrate your critical thinking by using your voice. We'll have a look at some strategies to do that in a minute. As I said before, you're demonstrating your depth of knowledge of the field. Okay, and everything has to be clear and explicit, and you do that through your voice. All right, you're the writer, you're in control of the message, and you need to get your reader to have that deep understanding of your study as well. So before we look at the strategies, let's have a look at why I talk about this. So common examiner critiques and also supervisors, they will say there's no critical thinking, there's no critical voice or lacks. Maybe that's better than having none. Now, one of the reasons why this comment comes out is it's not because you are not thinking critically or you don't have your voice and know what you're doing. It's because you haven't demonstrated explicitly enough in your writing. Okay, so it must be explicit so that they can see where your critical thinking is. We're going to look at that in a second. So here's some common critiques. Your lit review is too descriptive and is basically a list of previous research papers you've read widely, but we don't know what is significant and where you stand. So that's why you need your voice. Your lit review discusses theory, best practice, and empirical findings, but there's no link. We need to link everything. You have a well-researched lit review, but it's like a textbook. I don't know why I've hyphenated textbook. Sorry about that. Providing the background to a topic. Where does your research fit? So in the chat, we've got a, yeah, I'm worried. I'm doing the last point like I'm writing an essay. Yeah. So let's look at some strategies, how we can show our critical voice. It's not actually as hard as you might think. But we don't want to get these comments, do we? One way is reporting verbs. We will look at those in a second. Another poll. What are reporting verbs? All right, so most of you got B, which is good. What's a verb? Okay. Words used to describe actions. Yes, that's what verbs are. So reporting verbs are the actions that of other people's work and reporting on other people's work. All right, let's have a deeper look. So you're using these verbs to report your position on other people's work. So when we're talking about critical voice, the reporting verb that you choose puts forward what you think of what the literature is saying or what the author of that study is saying. So I want you to use a mix of strong and weak depending on where you stand to convey your voice. So the weaker reporting verbs are things like claims, describes. So Jones claims something, you're putting forward the view that you might not really agree with Jones. Strong reporting verbs are ones like argues, contends. So if you're saying Jones argues something, then that's putting forward your position of that you're thinking that Jones has a strong point, you know, whereas claims, Jones claims, you're putting forward that you think that he or she has a weaker point that they're making. All right, so that's just one way of showing your critical voice. And of course, in the lit review, you're going to have a lot of reporting verbs, mix them up. Okay, I don't want to see over and over again, Jones states, Brown states, Freeman states. That's boring. Okay, we need the reader, lead the reader through and engage the reader and show your voice at the same time. So interestingly, is the University of Adelaide have an excellent resource that I use all the time. Hopefully that link will work. It's a bit weird. I'm not sure why it came up like that. But anyway, just, yeah. So in the chat, I have my list with translations so I don't commit any crime. Exactly, meaning that you want to cite all your sources. So this resource, what I like about it is it's, it's got the weaker position, the neutral and the stronger position. That's just part of it. There's more there as well. But you can see, are you trying to show, what what the source has concluded? Are you wanting to show that you agree? And there's a whole stack more as well if you go into that, or just Google reporting verbs. But I want you to mix them up, all right? Use synonyms. Transition signals are also how you show your critical voice. Super important, they lead the reader through. You want to show cause and effect, hence, consequently, therefore. Mix them up too as well. I don't want to see 100 therefores. Maybe you don't like hence, that's okay. Maybe your supervisor won't like hence. Mine didn't. But you can see there's so many there that you can use. It just leads the reader through. Contrasting, you're using your howevers, conversely, nevertheless, that's one of my favorites. Mix them up though. On the other hand, you can see it in the second bottom one. Be careful with on the other hand, because it has to be very clear that these are two opposite things. I often see people using on the other hand when they should be using in addition or furthermore. So be careful with on the other hand, because these transition signals are portraying clearly to the reader where you're going and what you're saying. You're saying there's a cause and effect, there's a contrast. This is another addition to what I've been talking about. If you're using additionally, also furthermore. Okay, so this might seem basic to you guys, some of you guys, but this is how you show your voice. It's not really as a difficult thing as sometimes we might think. Oh my gosh, why are you all asking about the slides? Yes, you'll get a copy of the slides at the end. They'll be up on Blackboard and I'll send you an email. Okay, so another way that you're going to show your critical voice is have explicit sentences that say what you think. So think about tense as well. I've got that up here. So in your proposal, you're generally in future tense. The present study will contribute to current understandings. The present study will provide further insight. Be explicit. Don't make us guess. You might have already said, oh, there'll be, this study's investigating these issues, but then say that you'll be providing this insight into a specific thing. When you're talking about the literature as a whole, I want you to be in present perfect, okay? Because present perfect means it's happened in the past and it's still happening now. And that's where we are at with the literature. Happened in the past, but it's still happening now. So, although numerous studies have investigated, have found, have demonstrated, these were limited in terms of blah, 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 okay? That's research proposal. Final thesis, you're in present tense. The present study contributes to current understandings of this research field by examining, investigating, blah, blah. Okay. Same thing, present perfect for literature as the whole. You need those explicit sentences so the reader can say, okay, I see, it's clear. Do not make us guess. Manchester Phrase Bank, I've just put in. That's excellent. It'll help you with these kinds of explicit phrases for every chapter. Use your evidence effectively. This is another way you show your critical thinking. We have author prominent or information prominent citations. So if it's important for the reader to know who the author is, make it author prominent. If it's not as important, information prominent. And I want a mix of this. I don't want you to use just one all the way through. We want a nice mixture as we go. Try to always use primary sources. As HDRs, you shouldn't be citing secondary sources. So Brown is cited in Jones. Go to Brown. Go find Brown's article and cite Brown directly. Okay. And with your quotes, be careful. I'm not going to say don't include quotes because they can be useful, but I don't want to see a whole sentence that is just the quote. I want you to incorporate it into your sentence, like the example I've got there. Keep quotes to a minimum though. What's minimum? Not even one a section. It maybe one a section. Within a chapter, you wouldn't have more than 3 or 4. Avoid just describing. As we said, we have to inform. So your describing is important, but you also have to persuade. You persuade through your critical voice. So here's an example of a made up research looking at engaging learners. All right, what's the best way? So you can see I've done a little table there, the participants. What did each of these authors say was the most suitable? And then I've written a sentence. According to Brown and Smith, Microsoft Teams is the preferable online platform. Jones has argued that Zoom provides an engaging learning environment due to its simple chat function and breakout facility. All right. So that is just describing, isn't it? Now, remember, I'm not saying don't just do this, not at all, but I want describing and analysis. So here's a better example. What do we notice? Sentence 2, however, there's our transition signal to say, this is the opposite view. Don't let the reader make up their minds. You tell the reader what's going on. However, more recently, Jones argues that. Now, what about sentence 3? This latest finding is significant because explicit and clear. Okay, don't make the reader guess what's going on. Sentence 4, nevertheless. Okay, more transition signals. All 3 studies have focused on teachers' experiences rather than learners, and the inconsistency between the findings suggests further research is needed to understand learners' attitudes towards online learning platforms. So then we probably want another sentence to say, this study will help to fill this gap, right? Explicit and clear. Transition signals, notice in yellow, there's an inconsistency between the findings. Don't make the reader work that out for themselves. You tell them that there's an inconsistency. And what does that inconsistency suggest? We need to be explicit and we need to be clear at all times. And that you do that using your voice. Strong vocab, here's an example here. That's your voice as well. Just try and get out of the way of that. Academic reading has a crucial role. So not just any role, a crucial role in literacy and learning. So there's a weakness in the literacy academic literacy research. It requires urgent attention, not any attention. It needs to be urgent. This is a problem that needs to be solved. There's been disproportionate consideration. So we've got something under scrutinized and under theorized. The implication of this gap is, so see that explicit wording? We're not having to guess what the gap is, it's there. Reading skills has been neglected in disciplinary pedagogies. And then I've got more on the rest of the paragraph. Therefore, reading practices have a significant impact. So not just a little impact, a significant impact. Such studies can add to current knowledge and help enhance reading pedagogy. So even another sentence after that, or even this study will add, okay? So last strategy, seek feedback. Be an effective participant in the feedback process. Take an active role. It's two-way dialogue. It's not just you sending a 20-page document to your supervisor and saying, there you go. Ask them some questions. What is it that you want feedback specifically on? Maybe it's that structure. Maybe it's whether you needed to include all this information or not if you're needing to be concise. When you get feedback returned to you, if you don't understand, ask for clarification nicely. We're always nice to people who give us feedback. If you disagree, explain why. That gives you that discussion opportunity, you know, and to help with your problem solving and your critical thinking. But the main thing when you're receiving feedback, breathe. Don't get emotional. They're not talking about you as a person. It's purely the words you've written on the page. Don't always respond straight away either. Okay, have time to think, and you'll realize often when you come back that it wasn't as bad as you thought. What we tend to do is focus on the bad, what we think is the bad feedback. But in there somewhere, you will have done something good as well. All right, so we have HDR writing peer feedback sessions. I facilitate those. They're really good for those in progress drafts to get some feedback. You get critical discussion time with your peers, and it will really improve your drafts, improve your writing as well. So we've got one coming up on Monday and then a couple more through April, May. So please come to those if you can. And I think I have a link for you. Yeah. Okie dokie. So common challenges. We're nearly done. You've done very well. We're right on time. Oh. There we go. All right, so lacks clear structure. Okay, that's why we do that big picture thinking. Choose a structure that you think works, seek feedback, see what they say, print out your table of contents, see how it flows. And as I say, keep seeking feedback. Too broad, not enough detail. So remember what I said, when you're talking about a specific previous studies, give us a bit of information. Don't just write one sentence. Jones investigated blah and found something, right? It's not enough. I'm left hanging. Give me a little bit more, you know, write 2 sentences, not one. And synthesize and connect. Talk about the literature as a whole. Talk about some specific studies. How are they different? How are they similar? Not up to date, it's a living document. You need to keep adding. All right, now if you're going to submit your final thesis or even your confirmation document or your research proposal in 2022, you should have something from 2022 in there. All right. Another common challenge is not including those seminal articles or researchers. Really important that you're aware of who the key researchers are in your field. Read widely, notice what other authors and researchers, who are they citing regularly? Ask your supervisors too. Staying on track. Your lit review is really acknowledging those previous researchers, particularly those of them who have made significant contributions, and then setting up where your contribution will add. Make sure you be explicit, as we said. You need to use your voice. When you're reading, don't just read the content. Read to see how the writers are engaging you as the reader. How do they demonstrate their voice? Take note. And then keep coming back to those purposes and making sure you fulfill those. Okay, so main takeaways for today is living document. Keep on working on your lit review. It is a work in progress. Always think about the reader. Make sure you're explicit and clear the whole way through, and ask for feedback as often as you can. All right, so now it's time for you guys to let me know how this session was for you. You can use that QR code. You can use the link I've just put into the chat. It's anonymous. It'll only take you a couple of minutes. I'm going to give you a minute to do that. It's very quick. There's only about 4 questions. Okay, so if you want to know more, as I said, we've got a writing circle coming up on writing a lit review. We've got coherence in academic writing, and we have a workshop engaging your reader, which we talk a whole lot more about using your voice. So please come along to those. What's on soon? Monday, peer writing, HDR writing peer feedback, a workshop on academic writing on Wednesday, Writers Lounge on Thursday, where you can go in and do writing sprints and get your drafts done. And 31st of March, we've got a research proposal writing strategies. So that one links to the workshop that we had whenever that was, last week maybe, I think it was the workshop. You can see the recording of the workshop on Blackboard, but the writing circle's coming up in a couple of weeks. Make sure you read those HDR matters, those emails that come out to you every week. That's got all the information you need. Please use HiQ and Blackboard. We have so many resources up there. And of course, the HDR skills assessment tool is always helpful to see what other transferable skills besides writing and the training you can do for those. Okay, well done. We've made it to the Q&A. Is anyone wanting to put any questions? You can turn on your mic. You can pop it into the chat if you've got any questions at all. All right, in the chat, do you have any tips of how to summarize the complexities of a broad research field into a proposal? Okay. So I think the most important thing there is to flag the fact to the reader and say, hey, this is a broad research field with a lot of complex parts. There's too many details to give. Maybe don't say as explicitly as that, but just flag the fact that it's complex. This section will gives a broad overview of those complexities. You know, flag that fact that it's a research proposal, okay? And so and try to cut out as many words as you can. Make your sentences really concise if you can as well. I don't know if that helps, but, you know, you can flag the fact this is a summary of a field of study that is very complicated and broad, but you know, the summary is, and then just give them the really broad overview. Yeah, it can be hard in your proposal because you do have a lot to say, but come back to what the fundamental thing is of your proposal is. You are wanting the panel or the supervisors or whoever it is to say, hey, this is worthwhile, this research project, and you should be allowed to go ahead and do it. So potentially the fact that you have this really broad field of study is it's not something that's super important for the purposes of your proposal. Yes, flag that you understand it, flag the fact that, you know, you do understand that it's complex, but for the purposes of this proposal, here's a very brief summary. And then go deeper into the bits that are important for you to justify and give evidence of why this research should go ahead. You know, as we said, there's a lot of things going on in the lit review, and for a proposal, there's certain things that are going to be more important. And then by the time you get to your confirmation and your final thesis or your final MPhil thesis, you'll have more room to then really give that reader that deeper understanding that potentially is not as necessary in the proposal. Someone else in the chat, I'm worried I can't summarize and explain, and I have so many references. Yeah, 2,000 words is hard, but this is where your critical thinking comes in. Maybe you're going to write 3,000 words, send your draft to your supervisor and explicitly say, I know this is too long. I'm struggling to figure out what to cut out. What do you think? Okay, so that's a strategy as well. Ask them to help you. Maybe then they can, you know, depending on how many words you end up with, if you're only 200 over, that's not so hard, is it, to cull down? But never delete anything, by the way. Whatever you decide not to keep in your proposal, you can use later on. But as I said, you're going to keep it under that 2,000 words by flagging the fact this is short. Okay, you don't have all the room to play with. And so this is a very brief summary or brief overview just to get a gauge of where you're going. All right, good. So yes, proposals are challenging purely because you can't fit very much in, right? But that's part of what you need to demonstrate is your ability to stick to those word limits. Good questions, hard answers. You know, and you're all different. It's very hard to say what will fit for one of you will fit for somebody else, but just think of the reader and explain to them what you're doing. You know, yes, there's a lot of variables. Yes, there's a lot of concepts. For the purpose of this proposal, the focus will be on A, B, and C because of these reasons. And just let them know, keep them in the loop. They'll like you for that. Yeah, dear reader, I don't know what I'm doing. Look at these papers I found. Yeah, thanks, Louis. That's a good one. Probably not quite like that, but you are being explicit and clear, so nice. Yeah, look how good I am at searching the literature, which is the easiest thing to do in the entire part of a research degree, right? Yeah, tell the AIRS team. This is the easiest bit. All right, another question in the chat. If I wanted to find something that doesn't have a clarified definition, can I make my own definition, and do I need to reference if I do this? Good question. Yes, you could make your own definition, but you won't say you've made your own. You can say, for the purposes of this study, this concept will be defined as blah based on a range of other definitions. Okay, so you just again flag, hey, there's lots of definitions out there. None of them fit exactly for my research investigation. Therefore, for this study, the definition of this concept is this. And the reason why it's this is because it'll fit for my participants. It'll fit for my aims, whatever it might be. Exactly. Okay, so nobody's explicitly researching what you're doing. They fail to take into account, right? So your definition takes into account the parts of your research that are important that no one's done. So again, tell the reader that, you know, there's lots of definitions. They don't fit what I need because of this. So here's this definition that I'm going to use in my study. Cool. Good questions, guys. You're thinking. I like that. All right, what do we got? We're right on 12 o'clock. All right, so thank you for everyone for coming to the workshop. There's our reference list. Thank you for coming along, and I'll see you all again soon.